Morning. Welcome to Shumei International Institute. My name is Deanna and I organize the community events up here. And so if you haven't been up for a whole living symposium before, this is relatively new. It's been within the last year. And basically what happened was that Shumei America had a green living event. And it sparked something with Mitsunari, who works here. And he said, you know what? We have so many amazing community members that have things to share about holistic living, whether that's mental health, physical health, food, and like next month we're going to be talking about home birth, just trying to think closer to home and the things that we have from our community members. Now, many of you know that Kizzen has lived here for a very long time, and that Crestone is a unique place to garden and provide food for yourself, because we're not the easiest to get to. So please help me welcome Kizzen, because she has so much to share with us. I'm very excited to have her here.
So first of all, I'm going to ask some of you on the back to come up in the front, because when the front seats are empty, I feel like people are afraid of me.
I'm not afraid.
So, Karen has this seat. All right, so I don't have to yell at everybody.
That's Janet, that's Janet.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to welcome everybody here, and I'm really glad that you were able to come. And so, first of all, just to kind of get an idea of who everybody is here, so I know who I'm talking to, I want to ask you to raise your hands for a few things. So, who has or has gardened? Okay, about everybody. Who has ever had livestock, or chickens or livestock? Good. How many of you heat with wood or have heated with wood? I'm going to be preaching to the choir. How many of you have jump-started a car?
Using a clutch.
Okay. Can you split wood? Alright, right. Have you ever hauled water for more than a week, and that includes camping? Alright, we had a few of them. How many of you cook? How many of you like to cook? Okay. So when Deanna first asked me to come to talk, you know, I've lived here, she said, 36 years, and with my wife Janet, we have a big garden, and she talked about homesteading, and I don't really consider myself a homesteader now. Maybe at one point in time in my life when I had chickens, and I had goats, I had a burrow, I had geese. Don't ever get geese. Don't ever get goats. And had that, was kind of doing that back to the land sort of a thing. And I was in my 20s, and you're going to be young and strong, and I haul the water and all of that. And now we have a big garden, a pretty sizable organic garden, growing at 8,000 feet, which is going to be its own challenge to have a garden at this elevation. We have fruit trees. We no longer have any livestock other than bees, and so we have 2 beehives. We live off-grid. Our house is all solar, and so this is sort of a lifestyle choice that we have. And when Deanna says about to talk, you know, we make, you know, I can, we freeze items, we dry things, we store food in various ways. She said, I thought, well, maybe I'll come talk about canning, how you can, or how do you do this? And she said, no. She says, we don't want you to talk about how to do these things. She says, we want to know why you do these things. Well, So I thought about it, and I started to notes. Why do I do this? This is a lot of work. I could go to the store and buy carrots for a lot less energy and time than it takes to grow carrots. Why do I do this? And I thought about it, and I started writing down some things. Thankfully, I had a lot of advance time, and so I visited my daughter. She lives in Fort Collins, and even though she has a big garden, and she's really an avid canner, and the pickles on the back table are from her. And she pickles everything, and she has bees on a city lot. And I visited her, and it was like, so Nakia, you've got this garden, and you have this, and she has a full-time job, and she doesn't need to grow her own food. And so I asked her, so why do you do this? And she paused, and she thought about it. And the first word she said was the first thing that I had written down, which was connection. Connection. So we talked about that, connection. And that is almost a fundamental reason why anybody decides to grow their own food or have a garden, is because there's a connection to the earth. There's a connection to your sustenance, to the food that you have, that you're putting in your body, that there's a connection to it. There's a connection that goes all the way back to this little piece of dry something or another that is a seed that looks like nothing, and you put it in the ground, and magically it becomes alive, and even more magically it grows up into a whole plant. And then, then you end up with this ear of corn, or this carrot, or this cabbage, and you have a direct connection to the soil, to the sunshine, to the water that goes onto it, the wind that blew those plants. All of that, you have a very intimate connection to that. And it's that feeling that that makes you keep doing it. It's like, why put up with a cat? But they get on your chest and they purr, and then you forgive them for everything else. And so it's that sense of connection to the living things in life. I also talking with my daughter, because we both do a lot of canning, and it's like, why go to this trouble? You can buy these things at the store. The other part is that you know exactly what's in that food. You know exactly what that is. She, like myself, we'd also go to farmers markets. We buy directly from the farmer. There's plum jam that's over there. I know, that came, through from the western slope. And I know, I hope you all have some of that. Where that came from. It's not just some random thing that's coming in from California or Texas or maybe Argentina. You have no connection to it. You know what went into that. And it's a similar thing like cooking. Making soup. You can go to the store and you can buy a couple of cans of soup, of vegetable soup, for a whole lot less money and a whole lot easier than making your own soup. Making soup's complicated. You peel this and chop this and buy that, maybe make broth and all of this sort of stuff, and you end up with soup. Why bother with all of that? And part of it is the next step of this, is there is a satisfaction that you have. There's a real satisfaction. I'm going to pass out a few pictures here in a minute. But the other thing is we want to be able to do things that have value. So something we really seek in our lives. When we live sort of disconnected, what is your value? What is it that you want, that you do, that really gives you a sense of satisfaction? And that you can feel an accomplishment for. And so when you are able to grow your own food, when you're able to make your own soup, you can stand back and it's kind of like, I helped create that. And mosquitoes up there, you know, all of the late frost that I had in starting the chainsaw, I had the cord break. And I'm like, what? Cord broke. Do I take it to Alamosa? Do I take it to the shop? Do I go see Andrew Martinez? What do I do about this? And I thought, well, I'll go and look up a YouTube video. So I went in a YouTube video, Google, whatever it was, my chainsaw, and they showed a little video. It's like, this is a piece of cake. So I went to the hardware store, I bought the little cord. I came home, I took my chainsaw apart. I'm watching the video, I rewind, you know, and I go ahead, and I put the cord on there. Okay, is that good? Yeah, burn the ends on it, put a knot on there, make it the right length, this is right, okay, whatever. Did that, and then went, vroom. And I'm like, look! It's rolling around. I had to tell Janet. I did this. Any guy out here would just go, yeah, right. You know, it's just wrapping a cord around the thing and everything else. But that sense of satisfaction, I'm telling you the story now because I'm so satisfied with myself that I was able to do this because that's totally out of my comfort zone. Totally out of my comfort zone. And part of being resilient is to be able to move without outside of your comfort zone, to do something that will make you more self-reliant. As I said before, Janet and I, our house is off-grid, we're all solar. That's a whole other story of a lifestyle choice of to live with the sun. It's wonderful, you're always in touch with what's happening with the sun. But I wanted to move into a little something else here, because I like to tell stories. Before I move on though, I want to point out to you all this book called Breeding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Breeding Sweetgrass. If you are interested in connection to the earth, interested in connection to an indigenous view of life, and you like stories, when I got this book, I have now bought like 9 or 10 copies and have given them to all my children and so many friends, and I've passed them out liberally. So, a sense of accomplishment. I'm going to read you a story. For those of you who have, I tell you what, before I go into the story, let me back up. I'm going to pass around, since I mentioned this. But this is our house. This is what our house looks like. So pass it around. This is Janet and I with a great big cabbage. I want to pass that around. That's great. This is a picture that shows you. This is like monster cabbage, and we grew that cabbage. And yeah, we could go to Safeway and we'd buy cabbage, but I'm not going to come out of Safeway. Look at this. It's not going to feel that way. So that's the cabbage. Okay. So this is one. This is Janet. Who knows what those are?
Parsnips?
Parsnips. Who said parsnips? All right. Do you realize the hole that this was created?
I have to tell you, Mamie Bell gardens with us. She tried to dig out this parsnip and said, never mind. And so then I went and got the shovel and finished digging it out.
There's a whole this deep in the garden. And I want you to look, I'll pass this around, I want you to look at this sense of satisfaction. Smugness. I'm not going to come out of Safeway carrying parsnips. That's just one parsnip. And so here's 2 other photos. I saw this on Facebook and I had to print it off for this talk because how much do a dozen eggs cost at the supermarket? $2, $3, you buy organic, $4?
Or five.
Five organic
Six.
eggs.
Yeah, for.
Okay, cheap. Eggs are cheap. Eggs are one of the cheapest proteins you could ever get. Okay. There again, why have chickens? Why do this? I want to pass this one because I love this expression on this side. I love this. You are not going to, yeah, you gotta look at this because you're not gonna walk out of Safeway. This joy that this little girl has, this incredible joy. She is so tickled. She is just thrilled. It's like, oh, Mom, look what I have. And all the chickens are around. And if you haven't had chickens, I gotta love chickens. I just love chickens. The way they talk to you and all of this. So that photograph there, I had to print that out. And let's see. Craftsmanship. Let's go to the story. I took a picture here because the other day we got a box of plums. And here is a picture of the plums and my bowl and my knife. And I'm sitting down to do this. And to me, that's I spend most of my time on a computer. You all know that. I publish a Crestone Eagle newspaper. All the time on the computer. And to sit down with the bowl of plums and my bowls and my freshly sharpened knife and my cutting board, which used to be a dresser top 4 years ago. Janet keeps trying to get rid of it. I won't let her. This was the result. This is a plum crisp that, oh my God, was so good. And those are plum jam, which I put on the back with some of the plums. I took this because I like show and tell. This is kind of what happens here. This is an alchemy that is just wonderful. So on the back table there, we have some pesto. This is basil from our own garden with garlic from our own garden. Parmesan cheese, no. Pinyon nuts, well, maybe this year. There's some ginger pear jam that I made that is incredibly good. There's pickles from my daughter, who's a wonderful pickler. There's a little jar of honey that came from our beehive. And that honey tastes like here. It tastes like here. It comes from here. You taste the flavors of it. That's what here tastes like. It's sweet and it's floral. So, next part of the show. And then we'll go to questions and answers. Okay. So talking about a sense of accomplishment and whole living and picking up skills, I wrote a story in the Mountain Mamas a number of years back that I wanted to share with you. I don't know what it has to do with whole living, but it sort of does. This one's called Easy as Pie. Whoever coined the phrase easy as pie never made pie. Or at least not one with a light as a feather, flaky, melt in your mouth, delicate crust. Back in the early 70s, I was a young mother living in an old log cabin on a 100-acre spread in the bottomland of Chalk Creek Canyon. There was a cluster of old abandoned cabins left over from a long ago dude ranch, resettled by various back to the land folk. The Colorado mountain towns of the 70s saw the first wave of natural food and organic stores. I worked part-time in one of the first natural food stores in Chaffee County, the only one in Buena Vista. It was a 10-mile drive away, but I liked the work, and while pregnant with my second child, could bring my firstborn daughter with me. I started learning how to cook all sorts of new foods: bulgur, brown rice, blue corn, lentils, and tempeh, to name a few. What do you do with this? I'd ask, peering into bins of unfamiliar grains and legumes, and break out Diet for a Small Planet or the Moosewood Cookbook. But my favorite cookbook was an old pre-World War II Norge farm cookbook that told you how to cook from scratch, really from scratch, as in pluck one chicken. It even had drawings on how to build a root cellar. I learned to make whole wheat bread and even got it to rise, learned to make soup from thin air, tofu out of soybeans, veggie burgers out of most anything, but I couldn't make a pie. Oh, the filling would be good. Any kind of fruit with sugar is bound to be edible. But the crust, well, shall I say, at least the chickens liked it. Well, anyone who knows me knows that I can be a determined woman. Some might say stubborn, but that's an unnecessarily harsh description. Really. Making a good pie became a challenge, a mission. How can I consider myself a decent cook if I couldn't make pie, especially since it's supposed to be so easy? So I decided to make a pie a week until I could put out a pie with a nice, flaky, edible crust. I consulted my friends, cooks, and neighborhood grandmas, and each of them gave me different suggestions. Use lard, said a cabin Fred. That's what her mama used. Butter's the best, said others. Mrs. Wright in town, and a mother of 5 and longtime country cook, said Crisco was the only way to go. There was always plenty of pie advice. Work fast, use more water, use less water, use ice chips, add more flour to the board and dust it up good. And of course, get yourself a good rolling pin as that wine bottle you've been using. I got a cheap wooden rolling pin, figured it should work okay since it was all in the wrist anyhow. And I tried week after week cooking in my wood cook stove oven. The whole wheat flour, I was a natural foods purist in those days, crumbled and fell apart when I tried to roll it out. I added more water, and it turned into a gooey mass wrapping around the rolling pin and cooked up hard. I added more lard, butter, shortening, and it melted, then fried. My family ate the filling. The chickens were kept happy. I consulted the Norwich cookbook, never a mention of whole wheat flour. I mixed up a new batch of flour, pastry whole wheat, mixed half and half with unbleached wire. Ice cold water, better, much better. Time went by, I experimented, forget the lard. Butter or shortening was the way to go. Any kind of whole wheat throws the whole formula off. How purist do I want to be? I settled on unbleached white. I made a pie once a week for a year. Apple, peach, cherry, berries were their own special challenge. Basket weave, fancy tops with cutouts, and pumpkin right out of the garden. Every pie was a little better until, just like a blinded kung fu master, the crust and I became one. There's a balance, a chemistry. Pearls of shortening have to be coated with flour, but not absorbed. A splash of water holds it together, but not too tightly. You cut and chop, never stir. You feel it with your fingers, just so. You roll, but don't compress. A stroke, a stretch, a kiss, and if it's just right, if the oven is just hot enough, and if you're lucky and have said all the right prayers to the great pie goddess, you get a pie where someone casually comments, "Oh, good crust." It doesn't mean it doesn't always happen among us common cooks, us non-chefs, that heavenly, flaky pastry crust. Even now, after 35 years of pie practice and a professional marble rolling pin, it's an alchemy that isn't always there. But when it does, I'm secretly, smugly pleased. And when the appreciative ask, "How did you make that crust?" I do smile and say, "Oh, it's easy. Easy as pie." So now we're getting close. It's 10:30 to questions. Anybody has any questions? I'd also maybe like to Joan, she's about to slip out of here.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Okay. So I'm gonna ask Janet to say a few things. Anybody have any questions? And speak up because I'm very hard of hearing.
So what happened to you when you were say 3 to 6 years old that made you a resilient person?
A maple tree. I grew up in the city of Chicago, right in the inner city, as youngest of 3 daughters. And my mother, who had originally grown up on some semi-farmland south of Chicago, her parents were Polish immigrants, so they lived on some little acreages and had a small little truck garden. So we didn't grow food, but we had a backyard that my mother planted with a lot of flowers. And I'd say one of my favorite things was we had a maple tree in our backyard that my mother had actually planted way before I was born. And that was one of my favorite places to go, was to climb up into that maple tree and get way the heck up there until I was told, go fly, what are they doing? And I would hang out in the maple tree. And you could see over the neighborhood, and that was really a connection from that age 3 to 6. As I got a little bit older, my mother had multiple sclerosis, and by the time I was probably maybe about 8 years old, she was not moving very well and was in a wheelchair. And so I became like her arms and legs. When she would cook, it was me, she'd be in a wheelchair, and it was like, get this, grab that, add this, put this in, stir it, whatever. And I learned to cook the way she did, and okay, that's about good. And so helping to take care of her, I think, added a lot of that, of learning to cook, learning to do things, having to help within the household chores and things. That was a certain amount of just learning how to do things that maybe a lot of kids my own age weren't given sharp knives and told to chop. And I learned, but that was also my connection to nature. I had some aunts and uncles that still lived out in the country, and we would go out into their place every now and then. I had an Aunt Helen who'd show up with big baskets of vegetables and produce. And even though I lived in the city, she would bring in the harvest. And I had lunch tray for a little more like I'm about 9 years old. And we were there, they had a little farmhouse, not a very big spread at all, and they had apple trees, and I was probably 9 years old of that. And I went wandering out in the field, and they had half a dozen cows way out there in the meadow. And I'm just out there doing this. Well, the cows are like, oh, there's a person, maybe there's food, time for food. So the cows start coming towards me. I'm way out there, and so I think I better get back. And so I start running back to the fence. Well, the cows pick up, and they're like chasing me across the field, and I'm like, and everybody, the adults are on the other side of the fence having a good laugh on that, and like dive through the fence, and there's all the cows, like apples. And so I had that connection with the countryside, and that was great.
I'm wondering where you got your gift of words. It is so incredible to connect with you and your ability to express these things into words that to me is just innate. You say, why do we do this? It's just something inside innate, yet you put these beautiful words in a description to it. I love your gift of words. Where did you get it?
I've got an awful lot of Gemini in my chart. Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Vince. I like words. I like words. Yeah. Always have. Avid reader. I just love words. I love the language. I love literature.
You and words are one.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Vince. John?
Yeah, this is more a suggestion than a question. I just, it's a lovely piece you wrote. And I think just having been struck the last dozen years or so about complete lack of connection in modern American life and all the horribleness that at least is partially connected with that. And you're hearing you talk about the simple life, the simple connection. You have people like Jillian and Annie really giving me, just since I've been, just the people in this room have given me a couple of really good connective experiences. I've had a couple myself. Why don't you have people like on that the living for the good sake? It's important, and I think you can get a lot of people doing it, and it's not as well written as you are so well.
Thank you, John, and I love your articles. John writes for the Crestone Eagle. He writes POA News with everybody like, please apply. People we went through trying to find somebody willing to do the POA report.
I also like watching paint dry.
And John also writes, he's been doing like the owner-builder conversations, which have been wonderful, really wonderful for the paper. And you're a very good writer. Yeah, that was awesome. Thanks. Anyone else have a question?
Not a question, but a comment. Just in the idea of connection, that sort of thing, taking it even beyond the idea of satisfaction, or maybe continuing on with the idea of satisfaction when you've harvested something. I found that when I'm eating it, you know, especially when my daughter was little, I would say, remember when we picked these strawberries last summer? These are those strawberries. And it calls to mind the whole experience, whatever happened during strawberry picking. I mean, one time she grabbed this fence. She went to pet a horse on the other side of the fence. I didn't realize it was electric. And she grabbed on like this, and I thought, oh my God, my child is electrocuted. Anyway, all that went into that strawberry. And I thought, you know, in eating food from the store, it's like, that's not even there. It's empty food, and it could have an awful lot to do with our country's problem with obesity. They're hungry for that connection and that whole consciousness that goes into that whole process.
When you grow your own food, it's true, there is a story. And it's just like, you know, like when my daughter goes to the farmer's market and she's talking with the farmers and all that, and with her children and purchasing this, or when we take out of the freezer things that we put in, it's January and here is this. And I love winter squash, we always grow tons of winter squash. And come January, when you cut open that winter squash and you bake it up, it's stored in sunshine. And boy, you really need it in January. And yeah, there's a story that goes with that. And there again, it's a connection. You're absolutely right. And you're not going to get that through the grocery store. It doesn't mean you can't get good food, but it's a story. It really is part of it. Within our garden, Janet here, my wife, is just, she's like the rock under the garden. I buy the seeds and I do the planting. Janet maintains it all through the summer, and then I do a lot of the canning or freezing or whatever. But I'd like Janet to just to say why she works so hard. Why does she do that? I'm going to tell you one other thing though about her. She kisses the plants. She does. She goes out in the garden and in the greenhouse and she kisses the plants. It's true.
They kiss me back.
And they love it, apparently. But please tell everybody why it is that you garden.
Oh boy, I would happily spend all my time out in the garden. It's so full of life, and the plants are just bursting with
goodness and health. And I just love seeing the results of making sure everybody gets enough water and you're all mulched the way you need to be, and they just respond. I just find it very gratifying. That's why.
Annie,
Well, I was kind of reviewing in my head my precarious relationship with my garden. It's mostly a flower and bird garden, but I did start out trying to do vegetables, and I cannot tell you all the horrible life forms that came into my garden. And there was the one thing called a orange tomato worm. It was just unbelievable. It's like, who makes these things? And everything in the rodent world, including cannibalistic voles, came into my garden. It was just amazing. And there's no way you can, put that much effort into something and then have it attacked without feeling somehow violated. And I'm just wondering how you probably have it down, so you don't have attack bunnies coming into your garden.
if I had more patience, I would sit out there with my little air pistol and get that squirrel. But we have tried to work out a peaceful relationship, and I have tried traps. It totally refuses to be trapped. So I'm thankful I don't have a problem with the chipmunks. This is one of those big things, I don't think called like a ground squirrel. It's got doesn't have the bushy tail, it has a flat tail, big and fat. And so the dog and I, we've all kind of played chase the squirrel. It is, those tomato hornworms are awful. And we feed the robins pie cherries. And you're always dealing with that sort of stuff. The bear. Last year we finally got apples, but the bear, all of our fruit trees, they get up about this high and then they divide. And that's because when they were about this big, the bear had to climb into the tree. And they could have stood there and picked all the apples, but no, had to climb into the tree, break the tree. So it's fighting against the other critters. We do okay. Janet's we use some different, like a saffron soap and things if we need to deal with aphids. The squirrels can be, thankfully we don't have much of a problem. What I find is that as an established garden, there is an ecosystem that exists, that we have the robins that come in that get the cutworms, so we eat the earthworms. But we have a neighborhood fox that comes in who hunts the compost pile and has kept down the little critters. We have traps for mice in the greenhouse, and we toss those out for the fox to encourage it to come. But there develops a relationship within nature, if you've been at it a while, in order to find a balance within an ecosystem. It takes a little while, but you end up with predators and prey kind of a thing. So the birds will come in and eat certain things, and you'll have once in a while we'll find one of those great big toad things. There's a big toad that lives in the garden, and we've got some little garter snakes that live in there. So you start developing an ecosystem where there are natural controls to a lot of things, if you're lucky, and it takes a while to allow those things to exist. And they do actually a lot of work within the garden. And then of course we lose things, tomato hornworms. There's just certain things that just have to die, we just can't tolerate, like tomato hornworms or aphids and all of that. But if you watch, it's like right now out in the squash, as I was harvesting the squash, there was one squash that squirrel had totally carved up and left the rest alone. It had its one that it ate, but it didn't eat on every one of them. And you'll notice that the red ants that are here, they will take aphids and they'll move them to a plant and work that plant. And so that plant's a sacrificial plant. We can leave that one alone, let all the bugs go over there. And they kind of handle that. The thing we have no tolerance for are the earwigs. Oh my God. But, so you put the cauliflower in the sink and underwater and then the earwigs float out. But yeah, it's hard to grow. It's really hard to have a garden. It's, you know, it's everything. It's like chickens. I gave up on chickens. Everything needs chickens. You know, everything. Bears, fox, raccoons, everything needs chickens. I just gave up on chickens. It was just too much to really battle everything in the neighborhood. Chickens for dinner. So. Anything? Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
My former spouse and I had too many beehives to count. We scattered them all over the countryside, but we were raising them at 300 feet elevation. So my question is, how do you deal with bees here in this climate, especially in the winter?
So I started with bees about 10 years ago, and I would have been way better off if I just purchased 55-gallon drum of honey. I've gone through, I started off with doing them out of the top bar hive. Don't do top bar hive, not in this climate. If you live in southern Texas, you can do a top bar hive, but you can't do it here because bees just don't get enough honey to be able to make it through the winter.
Explain what a top bar
Okay, well, it's kind of like a more natural way of beekeeping. There's like a box like this that has sides that come down. It's like half of a 6 sides, and they're only about this big, and they just can't produce enough honey to make it through the winter. So I've switched to the Langstroth hive, which are those white boxes you see stacked up.
That's what we use.
So I have lost bees to winter, making it through. I've lost bees to bears, a couple of times to bears. I had a wonderful hive 2 years ago and had a great big bear and I had an electrified fence. And it had been working pretty well for a while, and this great big bear went right on through that fence. We were out there yelling and hollering. There's 2 bears, one little one and one big one, and we're hollering. And I got out my little BB gun and I popped that bear on the butt. He ran and the dogs ran, and then a few minutes later, the bear was right back and totally tore apart my fence. I then rebuilt the bee fence. It's like Fort B. You really should see this. It's like super electrified, welded together, and the bear has not been able to get into it. For the winter, I take like a white styrofoam, and I completely wrap the hive, bottom, sides, top, with the styrofoam. If it's going to be really bad, I might throw like an old sleeping bag or something over it as well. But I found with just doing with like that 1.5-inch styrofoam along the side seems to work really well. And if they have enough honey, then they'll make it through. Yeah. And right now I'm nursing along a new hive that we got this spring that we're trying to build it up to be able to get through. Jose Villa, if anybody knows Jose, he's been my mentor. He's wonderful. Him and Sandy have been really helping me a lot on what to do. So I highly recommend him as a teacher. He knows his stuff. Yeah.
He's well versed in bees, particularly.
Yeah. So he really knows. So, and other questions? Yeah.
What did you do for your high school years and college years? And how did you get out west?
How does one?
Oh, I'm sorry. What did you do for your high school years and college years? Study-wise, was bringing you this way. And how did you get out west?
Oh, there's the story.
Oh,
It was the 60s.
yes, yes.
Chicago. Yeah. I saw Jimi Hendrix live. Rolling Stones. So it was the sixties, I was in Chicago, Old Town is very much like Haight-Ashbury or Greenwich Village. So I was a city kid in the sixties, I was a hippie, I was there, I was at the Democratic Chicago Convention in the Lincoln Park when the cops came in the school buses with their riot gear on and their windows open and their batons out the side of the bus shouting, kill, 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 and I was smart. And my friends and I said, let's get out of the park. So we got out of the park before tear tested, but I was very much involved with the anti-war protests. Jesse Jackson, who I was a little young for Martin Luther King. I was in Chicago when Martin Luther King was killed and Chicago was put on fire with the riots. I was there. Ended up staying at a friend's house for several days until it was safe to go across Chicago to the neighborhoods because it was awful. But I used to go to Jesse Jackson would have the civil rights marches and the high school that I went to, it was basically an inner city school, very inner city school, and the whole school periodically would walk out for some protest or another that was going on. We'd go marching down to the federal building in Chicago. We were in the Chicago 8 conspiracy trials. Or we'd go out to the civil rights marches and the anti-war demonstrations. So in the 60s, I was very much a political activist and talking to the people. So that was a lot. And then in that time period, I kind of, like so many, discovered a spirituality of shifting from, by 1968, things started getting a little more violent, a little more radical. And at that point, I started more into studying things like meditation or yoga, or started reading some of the books that were out there. The Eastern mysticism, and so I kind of backed out of the politics more and got more into like spiritual studies at that time period. And then when I was 19, my first husband and I got married on my 19th birthday, and I thought I knew so much. But I married this man anyways, and we hitchhiked out to California. And when I was out there, I got pregnant with my first child, who I miscarried when I was about 6 months old, or when I was about 6 months pregnant, and almost died as a result of it, and got a terrible sepsis infection. They saved my life by giving me a new type of antibiotic, because nothing else was working. I was on the ceiling looking at myself, and they were all like, oh, it's not good. So anyways, they saved my life with antibiotics, which is why I'm hard of hearing today. It destroyed my hearing, but it saved my life. And after that whole experience, I just wanted to go home. I wanted to go home. And so my husband and another friend and I, we were driving back to Chicago. We were going to go back to Chicago. And we came through the mountains, and there again I was 19, and I was not in a good state because, not just the loss of the child, what was actually bigger than that for me was the loss of immortality that you feel when you're 19 years old. Nothing bad's going to happen to you. You're like immortal. You can do anything. And all of a sudden, I almost died. And it was like, I could die. It was a real wake-up call. So we were coming back, and my husband, there was an old family friend or whatever, an old woman who lived on the Buena Vista, and it was like, let's go to Colorado, and we'll stop in and say hi to her, and head back. Okay, and we came through, and we came up through the San Luis Valley, ended up in Buena Vista. We were going to spend maybe 3 days there. We went up there, Cottonwood Creek there. And it was the end of September, and the aspens were golden, and the sky was the blue. And I'm a city kid, I didn't see anything like this. I mean, I saw the ocean, and that was amazing. And I just never had seen this at all. And we went up the canyon there and gone for a walk along the stream there, and there's these white cliffs coming up, and blue sky, and these golden things. And I sat along the creek and I cried. I had cried. And I felt a sense of grace that just filled me. And I said to my husband and our friend, I'm home, I'm staying. And we're traveling through Kizzen, we're in a pickup truck and we're going to Chicago. And I'm like, I'm staying, I'm home. And they tried to talk me out of it. I wouldn't go. You guys go ahead, go on. I was like, oh God. And I looked in the local newspaper there, and there was a little house for rent and a 1,000-acre ranch, and it was like $90 a month first and last month. And I said, let's go check this out. We don't even have $180. We barely got gas money to get back to Chicago. So we went out there, and the old guys at Gum Ranch, Chief Bell and Ray Gum, and looked at us. Husband with a ponytail, friend with a ponytail, and we're like 19 and early 20s, and we're just hippies going through central Colorado, which is totally cowboy country, out on this 1,000-acre ranch. And it was like, we wanted to rent the house. And it was like first and last month's rent. It's like, we don't have any money. And so he said, move in. And he put us to work, fixing fence and caring for these ancient horses who ended up dying that winter. And we landed on a 1,000-acre ranch in Colorado. And I stayed. And, that was, to me, that was home. And then from there, I started writing my stories about Mountain Mama. The college that I did was over many years of taking classes through Colorado Mountain College out of Leadville, and took classes out of Trinidad State College and some out of Adams State College. But my most of the degree that I have would be an associate degree in emergency medicine. I worked in ambulance for 15 years. So that's the story, how I ended up. Yeah. Just the spirit picked me up and just went with that. And that's where a lot of the resiliency came in, because that was definitely an ocean, what do we do now moment. And, that's when I learned how to jumpstart a car. That's when I learned how to take the 52 Chevy and park it on a hill and put it down and pop it into gear before we hit the bottom. Yeah.
So your husband stayed with you, the two people you were with, the two men you were with stayed with you?
Do I what?
In that little house, the two men you were traveling with both stayed with you?
They both did.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, they both did it. Yeah, they stayed with me, and then the guy John, after we moved out of that place the next one, he ended up staying and but rented his own place in Buena Vista. But yeah, we all stayed. Yeah, it was and those some of the stories I write about, like in that ranch house, of how the pillow would freeze to the wall because your frost of your breath would freeze, and you slept like this, and then have to peel back your blanket because it was frozen. Yeah, resiliency. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Really enjoying this, thank you. Is foraging or hunting any part of your cycle?
Foraging, yes. I don't do so much as I used to. For a while there, I was very much into herbs and started learning how to identify some of the local plants. One of the things that I will do is, like the apples that are in Cresto. My kids, when I was raising my children up, we always picked the apples. A lot of in this environment, what I have learned over time is it's such a fragile environment that I used to do more foraging of different things. I don't anymore because it's such a fragile ecosystem that it's it's hard enough to get things to regrow. We get these drought years, and so a lot of plants are just kind of barely hanging on. But you know, you go up like Cottonwood Creek and you can find raspberries, and those are fine. And you can, you know, there's things, the asparagus. When I lived up in Buena Vista, I'd take the kids down and we'd come to Saguache and harvest the asparagus that was all growing along the ranch land, you know, roads. So I don't do a lot. I used to do more foraging. I remember once it was a kind of one of those little lessons for me in long ago when I was up at the Zen Center, and I was out taking a walk, and I found some wild onions, and I brought some back, picked some and brought some back, feeling rather proud of myself that I had found these. And I really got reprimanded for doing that, because leave it alone. There are few enough wild onions. So unless you're in an area, and this is where this book, Creating Sweetgrass, I can't encourage you enough to read it. She talks a lot about the foraging and how to approach plants, how much to take, to communicate with the plants, to know when's enough, to know that other people now are all thinking it's really cool and might be coming back. So to know how much is enough to take and how much is to be left alone. And I highly recommend having that. I used to fish these creeks here. You know, when I first moved here, there was like 250 people on Crestone when I first moved here. So I used to fish, North Crestone, Cottonwood especially. If you could hike out to Dead Man's, good fishing on there. And I stopped doing that a number of years ago because as the population rose, more and more people were fishing. And then instead of catching some nice brookies like this, the brookies were all like that. And I realized, okay, it was getting overfished. So yeah, there are things you can go, like if you want to gather sunflowers or you want to gather mullein. I mean, those are just in such abundance that they need to be picked. So yes and no, a lot less than I used to.
All of these connecting points that you've had from the plants that you grow and the animals, could you, this is a very personal question, but could you name the people, say, let's say from the time you first got to Preston, who have been integral in your connecting with who you are as a human being, the people who have been very seminal in your life?
You know, the first answer to that one.
Yeah.
Bertha daughter.
Yeah.
Bertha. All of us who know Bertha love Bertha. Bertha daughter was Master Potter, who lived here for many, many years. I first met her when I first moved here. We both moved here about the same time in '83. Master Potter, an incredible, wise woman, understated, and many of us took pottery classes with her. And somebody one time asked her, like, what was her religion? And she said, I'm standing on it. And it was the mountains, was the spirit, was her teacher. And she'd communicate with the spirits who lived in the mountains. And she made these beautiful figurines, and there's still some fortunate people who have one. So Bertha was one of my greatest teachers as far as keep it simple, say I love you. Basically it. And so she would probably have a profound influence on my life. And those of us who went to her pottery class would go in and, oh yeah, whatever else. And she'd put you down, put a hunk of clay in front of you. Just feel the clay, be grounded, and get you on the wheel, and you're working on the wheel. And it's coming now. It's coming, isn't it? And just letting that go. So Bertha was probably one of my most profound teachers. She really was. And then I also look at my time as a young woman. There was a couple of older women who just sort of took me under their wings, that mentored me in some ways. Like when I first moved here, I had worked ambulance for about a year and a half, and when I came here, I had a brand new baby. And Beth Carlson, who was here, she's like, "You are an EMT?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So they drug me in, and within 6 months, they put me in charge of the ambulance service. Like, "You can do it." Okay, and I was only like 30-something years old, but to have an older woman recognize my capability that I didn't even know I had, and to say, "Go do that." And the same thing happened with the newspaper. P.D. Lipscomb, who was a POA manager, and I had worked for a while doing their publication of the Bacarani News, and I was just, this wasn't working, and then I put in, I said, "I'm not doing this anymore," and she said, "We don't need to be in the newspaper business. You're doing a great job. Why don't you just take it and create your own newspaper?" Yeah, no. And so she pushed me into that spot, and I went kicking and screaming the entire way. I was not going to do this at all. And here I am, 30 years older, saying, "Thanks, Petey." So those were people, and then the connection with the women, especially, and some of the men in this community. Rita Barol.
Yeah.
Rita Barol, goddess. I'm just like amazed. This is the background you're filming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was planned.
Yeah. I know, I love it. So the women that are here, yourself, you have been such a good Jillian here, and Abby, I mean, God, she's climbing these mountains, and that's like, if we can do that, maybe I can do that. No. So it's been the people that are here who have inspired me. You know, your writings, your teachings, your centeredness, your love. You know, Jillian, God forever, and her song. Remember, I tell a story here about Jillian years ago. It was really dry, and her and I went for a walk up Northwest Stone Creek, and we walk up the creek, and here's this mouse out rock hopping. And Jillian decided to sing to the rocks. And she says, "This is a song to call in the rain." And she sang to these rocks, beautiful rocks. It was like later on that day, it clouded up and rained. Okay. Yeah. So it's been so much the people, this community has been, I mean, it's just been amazing. The people that are here, the people that come here, the people who've inspired me, the people who supported me, the people who said, "You can do it, I love you, keep going," all of this. You know, those have been my teachers. You know, the person in the post office who says just the right thing at that moment that I needed to hear. I don't even know their name, but they do that. So, yeah, here, in the mountains here, in the wildlife here, and the bear who comes after the bees here. So, yeah, those are all our teachers. Anybody else? Questions? Vince, with your
Comment.
what?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm doing.
From my heart, for being the voice of the village.
Oh.
Yeah.
I love you, Vince.
I love you.
Thank you all for coming. We have food and treats. Please enjoy yourself.
Thank you.